Welcome to this podcast. It is the Plan It Your Way show where we turn business planning into a fun, jargon-free adventure. I am the owner of Clarity Group, LLC, and the goal of this podcast is to make business planning approachable and enjoyable. And don't worry, we're not here to bury you in buzzwords like synergy or scalability. This is a safe zone. By the end of this series, you'll have a business plan that makes sense, fits your style, and feels more like a roadmap than a homework assignment. What you can expect from this episode. Yes, we live in an age of data-driven decisions, but what if I told you that data can actually make you dumb, or possibly make you a worse leader? Today, we're going to dive into that and how smart business owners are using numbers to make dumb decisions and how you can flip that script so that data becomes your team's best friend instead of its worst enemy. We'll go through 3 ways data makes you dumb and 3 solutions. Problem number 1, data confirmation bias. We'll call this the story spinner. The issue with this one is when leaders cherry pick numbers to support decisions they've already made, or worse, decisions they intend to make in the future. So why is this a big deal for business planning? It's not uncommon to see somebody spin a story that the growth is so aggressive in their industry that this is a can't-fail opportunity, or the data shows that it's a hockey stick trajectory all the way up and to the right. Well, that might not be totally accurate, and it may be for the purpose of talking yourself or somebody else into a story. Here's a little example for somebody that might already be in business. They might be reading a customer review that they don't necessarily agree with, and instead of owning that interaction, they might say something like, "You know what? Don't worry about it. Our customer satisfaction is 85%. I'm just going to ignore that 40% of the people don't respond to the survey at all, but either way, I don't have to worry about this one review because our customer satisfaction is fine," right? Well, that's a sign that that leader may have fallen in love with their own ideas and is using data as a reason not to explore further into the actual source of the problem. So why is this dangerous? Because you're going to miss critical blind spots and make decisions based on incomplete pictures and biased pictures. Some red flag phrases are, "the data clearly shows," or "as you can see from these numbers." That's a sign you might only be getting one side of the story being very biased towards a story that somebody is selling. Pay attention if you're using these phrases, as it might be a sign you need to look at some different data. Problem number 2, data excuses. We're going to call this one the industry deflection. So this is when somebody uses industry benchmarks to justify poor performance instead of actually finding a way to improve. I'm going to give an example that's related to staffing and turnover. And maybe somebody's already in business and you hear them say something like, "Yeah, our staff turnover is 60%, but the whole industry average is 65%. So what's that really saying? That's saying that they're just a little bit better than the rest of the ones out there. So in other words, they don't really need to address it because the data already shows that they're doing pretty good compared to the industry. Now, during the business planning process, it's extremely rare, if ever, that I hear somebody talk about turnover, whether that's client turnover or staff turnover. So I think idealistically, when people are getting into business, they believe that because they have a great idea and a great plan, that their retention's going to be great, both of clients and then of staff. And then when things aren't always playing out exactly like you thought they would, or maybe you made a bad hire, or maybe some bad decisions as a leader, you get some turnover, whether that's clients or staff. And in these moments, it's pretty important that you don't lean on industry benchmarks to explain the turnover. When you do this, you're normalizing something that could be potentially avoided. And if your competitor up the street is not making that same excuse, then they might have a way better than industry average retention because they're focused on their own environment rather than outside factors or relying on data that might not even be relevant to their local environment. There are some red flag phrases that you hear when people are doing this. Those are, well, everyone in the industry struggles with, or at least we're better than. Problem number 3, data motivation gone wrong. We're going to call this one the overwhelm multiplier. What's the issue here? This is when a leader uses metrics to push an already overstretched, potentially team or business beyond its breaking point. And I'm going to address this from 2 different angles. First, from the angle of a business that's already open, and second, from the business planning process perspective to show how you can do this even before your business opens if you're not careful. First, let's talk about that practice that's already open. And let's just say the leader walks into the room and says, hey everyone, if we just see 1 more patient per day, we could increase revenue by ... So this happens because numbers tend to feel like they're objective and fair. It seems like you're setting some sort of reasonable goal. However, they're not very motivating by themselves. And the danger you're taking here is that if you don't really understand where the burnout may be coming from, or if that's even an achievable, sustainable goal, you might create a culture where hitting numbers matters more than quality or sustainability. So let's translate that over to the business planning process. It typically happens when you're breaking down the expenses, and you might see that profitability on paper is not exactly what you thought it would be, or maybe you call for that insurance quote and you're like, wow, my insurance is way more expensive here than I thought it would be. Let's pump up the revenue a little bit. Without really talking about operationally how that's going to happen, and if that also fits with your business plan, it's possible that you're setting yourself up to try to achieve numbers and metrics that may not be very realistic for your business. So before you use data as a motivator, either to validate your business plan or to try to make your team move faster, stop for a moment and see if you're hearing any of these red flag phrases. Just 1 more. If we could just increase X by Y percentage. Or here's the worst one. The math is simple. Okay, so those are some pretty common problems to see when data is not being used appropriately. So what am I saying here? Am I saying that data should not be used and we should just ignore it? Absolutely not. The problem isn't the data, it's how we're using it. And I want to share some solutions to these problems to help let data make you smarter, not dumber. And overall, if you feel like you're validating something that maybe somebody else is debating you on or pushing back, or maybe you are that leader that walked into the room and said, if we could just do 1 more, and you saw a couple of eyes roll, you might want to step back and see if possibly data being expressed in that way or being interpreted in that way is the best way to achieve what you're trying to achieve in your business. So let me tell you a couple of solutions to these to help let data make you smart. Solution number 1, seek data that disproves your theory. So what do I mean by this? In another podcast, I talked about talking yourself out of something, and this is exactly what you're doing here, except you're doing it with numbers and data and percentages. So how do you do this? Before making any data-driven decision, ask, what evidence could prove me wrong? So if we're planning a business and the first data point we see is this industry has a growth rate of 30% year over year, look for the evidence that could prove you wrong. In fact, look for similar or related industries that had big spikes up and maybe flattened out, or maybe that is a national number and has nothing to do with your local area. So look for that data so that you have a balanced viewpoint on what good looks like and also what dangerous or bad looks like. Create that devil's advocate analysis for every major initiative. Also, look at the same metric from multiple angles and time periods. The real world example of this, a lot of times people build programs where they assume that a certain number of people are going to buy into that program. So maybe your number is, I want to onboard 200 people in the first 90 days. This is a very common thing to do when you're planning a business, is to build a ramp up of clients and appointments and revenue over the first year of business in particular. But what if that doesn't go to plan? Have you considered making a minimum and a maximum so that you understand what happens if the plan does not play out like you expect? For example, when I was building my own business, that happened to be the year that a few hurricanes crossed Florida at exactly the same time. So the entire timeline for the building changed when 4 hurricanes crossed Central Florida in 1 year. Things changed. And oh, by the way, a couple years after opening, the housing crisis and recession hit, in which the business plan had to be essentially rewritten for the ramp up of the business and maturing rate of the business over the first 5 to 7 years. So that happens, and you have the ability to make these best case scenarios or potentially worst case scenarios at any point during your business, particularly during planning, but you should still do this after you're open as well. So what's the payoff here? You get to make more robust decisions, and you get to catch potential problems before they become a crisis. It's possible that when you do these good, best, bad scenarios in your data analysis, that you catch a problem that you can solve along the way. You might even come up with the solution to your problem before something even happens. This is a great exercise to do, particularly if you're in an area where weather can create chaos, and you might have severe ups or downs in business and adoption rates to things. And also for election year changes, anytime we have a presidential change, or sometimes even with local leadership, it can change how businesses operate in the area. So definitely look at your data from both perspectives, and maybe even disprove your theories along the way so that you have a very well-rounded view of what you're planning and what the pitfalls might be. Solution number 2. Set goals based on the reputation you want. This is really important when you're talking about clients and about employees. It's not as easy as looking at a metric, and it doesn't even matter if you toggle the time frame. There's really no other way to really understand your clients and your staff other than looking for those intangible metrics and indicators of culture, and not just percentages on a spreadsheet. So here's the first question to ask yourself. How do I want my employees to describe working here to their family? You should create metrics around that, around the employee experience, and not just productivity, and certainly not productivity just related to revenue. You should track these as a leading indicator of your culture and not just a performance indicator. So earlier I mentioned an employer that might say something like, the industry turnover is 65%, so we're only at 60%, and that's great. Well, is that great, or is that the turnover rate that you are leaning on because there's a problem that you've left unsolved? And is that really a rate that an employee would brag about if they were telling their family that they work for you? Like, would 6 out of 10 people leaving the environment be a rate they would brag about? Is that a rate you should brag about? The same is true for your clients and the return that they make to your business and how comfortable they feel giving you feedback. Here's some better metrics to consider. How many employees actively refer friends to work here? What percentage of exit interviews mention feeling supported versus overwhelmed? And how many team members volunteer for new projects or just avoid them? What you're trying to do here is build a reputation that attracts top talent and keeps them engaged in the relationship with your business. Understanding that employment is where people spend a lot of their time, and I don't think anybody wants to be boiled down to a turnover or retention statistic. They do, however, want to know that their employer or the person that's providing the service is actively looking at ways to make it a great place to be, either as a client or as a staff member. So take some action on this today. Whether you're planning your business or you already have a business open, identify one thing that you currently think is benchmarked against industry standards and reframe it around the culture that you want to create that has nothing to do with an industry metric. Solution number 3, fix process first, measure steps, not speed. With this approach, you're improving the metric by reducing friction in a process in your system. So how do you do this? Before asking people to do more, ask what's making the current process painful. Count everything. Count the steps, the clicks, the handoffs, the decision points, and everything within your workflow. If you're in a business planning phase, literally get out a pen and paper and draw boxes and arrows for everything you believe is going to happen from check-in to check-out inside of your business. Let your team help identify the most frustrating bottlenecks. And you might say, well, my business isn't open yet, so how can I let my team do that? Well, you're going to have training right before your business opens. You will be training your staff. And even though you might have just dreamed up the process flow for whatever's going to happen, you might have somebody that's joining your team with more experience than you, and they might be able to very immediately improve that process flow even before opening your business. So be open to that input. And then the most important part here is you've got to let your team's solutions shine, and you have to involve them in measuring the impact of those solutions. And measuring, by the way, when you're easing a process flow can be the metric of, yes, this feels better. So in the prior example, I said, hey team, let's see one more patient per day. With this method, we're adjusting that to what's one step in our current patient flow that drives you crazy. Let's eliminate it and see what happens. This is when the magic happens. This is when people help design solutions and they're invested in making them work. If you're in a business planning process and you don't have an open business to experiment with, set up a mock environment in your house. Set up a fake check-in counter, a fake checkout counter where your cleaning supplies might be relative to things. Get your family involved and literally role play walking through your processes, whether that's with computers or with actual forms. Whatever it takes to do a dry run of what you are imagining your clients and your staff will experience. Here's some questions that you can ask yourself to see if something needs to be audited or improved. How many systems does somebody touch to complete a singular task? How many people need to approve or review something before it's completed? What information gets entered, and is it in multiple systems? Where do people get stuck waiting for something? This is a really important one. The waiting for something can be that client complaint of, every time I call your business, I get put on hold. Or, my appointment time was 11 a.m., but every time I come, I don't get seen until 11:45. That waiting for something can be very reputationally damaging, so look for ways to improve that. And if all you can do is improve something 2 minutes or 3 minutes at a time, that's still improvement, and that's a metric to be celebrated. The payoff here is that efficiency improves and your team feels heard and empowered. And a big call out here if you're employing hourly staff, when you ask for a metric like, hey guys, let's just see one more patient per day, It's really important to recognize that very rarely does that increase hourly pay rates. And so from that perspective, you need to understand how empty that request comes across. And you might not always be able to financially afford increasing pay rates, but when you let people get involved in processes that make their day more enjoyable, you'll see that in your metrics, not just in the operational efficiency, but also in your staff retention and your culture. So let's shift the narrative. Instead of data making you dumb, we're going to shift to data being a celebration tool. And I largely do think of data as a lagging indicator of what already happened and not necessarily as the best indicator of what's going to happen. There's certainly ways to do statistics and do some probabilities of what can happen and do forecasting, and that's the budgeting process in general is a prediction of the future, and that is all based on data. So none of that is bad. But when you're in a small business in particular, and you're looking at your own clients and your own team in the eyes, we really want to shift away from data being a judgment tool or simply a progress tracker. And instead of saying things like, man, our numbers are down this month, what's going wrong, and we just need to make more widgets or add one more patient, we want to really shift that to thinking, let's look at what went well and how we can learn from anything that's been challenging. And I brought up wait times and hold times as those challenges because those are some of the most common ways that a team can chip in together to find little ways to improve the process. And it might start by just redesigning a check-in form, or maybe you get the credit card machine to check out in an exam room instead of in the front lobby. There's lots of little things that teams will come up with, and it might only take 30 seconds to a minute off of the process at a time, but you do that a few times and you've really supercharged that process flow for the future. Celebrate those things in your meetings. And as I mentioned, this feels better is a metric. You don't always need to report on hard stats and percentages and solid numbers. You can simply say in a meeting, we had 3 of our staff members working on our check-in process, and we had a few clients tell us that it felt better. We looked and we were able to get them in the room at least 3 or 4 minutes earlier, and also they were able to check out on time as well, and that's a huge win for the team. So notice there that I'm not calling out any strict percentages or any specific data points other than so far people are reporting that the changes we made just feel better across the board. And then give them an opportunity to weigh in and say, would you agree with that? The other thing you can do to build a culture around this is create that problem-solving culture altogether and give your team an opportunity during meetings to figure out something else. And it might just be a cleaning protocol. It could be a script that's set on the phone. It could be FAQs on your website. Whatever it is, if people are allowed to gather as a team and come together to solve things, that creates a great culture of feeling like you're contributing to your environment and that your ideas are valued. It's important to show progress stories. This is why I like to physically map out processes. Getting a big piece of paper or using a dry erase board, and when you're at the front of solving a problem, drawing a literal box, circle, triangle, arrow, and connect all of these things together and just show how many steps are in the process. And then as you solve things, you can start crossing out steps or combining steps. And that is such a great visual for a team to gather around and celebrate that they did that together. And something that seemed like it was just normal got better. And guess what? They're going to find another way to make it better, probably in the next 90 days to 6 months, because if they're empowered to do that, it's likely to happen. So make a longer term vision for how data is used in your business and use it as a tool for empowerment, not control. encourage proactive sharing of concerns in a healthy way so that you know that you can help solve them and that they can help solve them. It's great if people suggest improvements. I'm a big advocate for helping people understand the cost of improvements if they suggest something that requires an investment, and not in a punitive way of like, no way, we're not doing your idea because it's too expensive, but more in a, I see where that could really, really help. Let's look at how much we'd have to invest to do that and make a plan for how we're going to do that. And that way numbers become a shared language for growth and not so much individual judgment or just the assignment of more work. I have a couple of challenges for you. If you're a current business owner, I want you to pick one of two things. I want you to either pick a process that you've been frustrated with that is holding back whatever you want to achieve in a metric. Maybe it is that one more patient per day or one more order per day. Or I'd like you to look at your staff metrics and maybe look at your turnover rate and see, were you one of those leaders that was making a little bit of an industry excuse? And instead of 60% turnover, maybe you realize it'd be a whole lot better for your business if you were at like 20% turnover. And once you identify that process or that metric with your staff, I want you to think about the thing that's currently making it the most painful for you. And if there was one thing within that that you could change in an ideal world, what would that be? And this is really crucial. And you can't go back to data for this answer. You have to really think about what would make this feel better so that it's not so painful, either for you or for your team. If you have not opened your business yet, I want you to think about two things. First, think about your check-in and check-out process. That's why I'm suggesting that you role play, because it is important that as you open your business, even if you think it's perfectly designed right now, you need to look for that pain point and look for it early. You don't want bad habits to develop as you're opening your business. And if you have your whole process map written down, you'll be able to fairly easily identify where you need to have improvement. So I'd like you to plan ahead on this one and think about the process that could be the most painful, map it out, and be ready to adjust on the fly as your business opens. The other thing I'd like you to really think about is the staff retention stat. It's not uncommon for me to hear about people that are bringing old teammates with them over to their new business, and it's very natural to think that's going to work out really well. However, it doesn't always work out really well, and sometimes those relationships change, particularly if there's a change in who's leading who, or if processes change too much from the old environment to the new environment. You kind of had to get to know each other all over again. So I want you to think about what could be painful in that process. And these people are clearly important to you, or you wouldn't want to continue working with them. So how are you going to resolve that when that happens? And what kinds of questions will you ask to make sure that your team is part of the problem-solving process if and when things aren't as ideal as you would hope they would be? That's how you get to true staff retention, is being willing to plug in when things get difficult. So data does not have to make you dumb. When you use it to understand rather than judge, when you use it to improve processes rather than pressure people, and when you don't make confirmation biased industry judgments that just kind of make you look better than the other guy, data actually is a very powerful tool, and the smartest leaders really aren't the ones with the most data. They're the ones who know how to use the data, and they know how to use it in particular to make people's lives better, and that's either their staff or their client or themselves, because the business has to work for you as well. Here's what you learned today. Question your assumptions. Actively seek data that challenges your theories. Measure what matters to people. Set goals based on the culture you want, not industry averages. Fix processes before pushing performance. Remove that friction first, then measure improvement. And make data a celebration tool. Use numbers to empower and recognize, not to judge and place more pressure on others. Thanks for joining today. Please stay tuned as we tackle more topics that are important for entrepreneurs and business owners everywhere. If you need more information or need help, please reach out to me. Visit my website at smallbusiness-dreams.com.